A barefoot girl saved the millionaire from a burning car, but no one expected the visit of the black SUV the next day. The air hung heavy over the dusty stretch of road just outside the small village. The sun bore down mercilessly, its heat shimmering over the baked earth. Beneath the glow, barefoot Layla trudged along, her toes brushing against the warm, gritty dirt. At just 13 years old, her slender frame carried the wiry strength of someone used to hard work and little rest. Draped over her shoulder was a faded sack filled with old trinkets, worn beads, chipped wooden toys, and a few salvaged tools she hoped to sell to passers-by. Life in the village had always been hard. The homes were a patchwork of clay walls and thatched roofs, held together by determination rather than design. There were no paved roads, no streetlights, and no luxuries, just narrow paths winding through the settlement, surrounded by dry fields that barely yielded enough to feed the families living there. The sound of laughter, barking dogs, and an occasional bicycle bell painted a portrait of a place stuck in time, clinging to survival. Layla's mother, Amina, worked tirelessly to make ends meet. Washing clothes, hauling water, or working in a neighbor's field were her daily tasks. Every coin mattered, and yet it was never enough. Layla tried to help, selling her small collection of goods to drivers on the main road. The coins she earned barely bought bread, but she still left each morning with hope. That day had begun like any other. Layla sat near the bend in the road, where cars occasionally slowed enough for her to approach. Most drivers waved her off, their attention fixed elsewhere. Dust swirled in the wind, coating her hair and face. By noon, her stomach growled, and her sack was still full. She thought about her mother back home, worrying over rent they couldn't pay and meals they couldn't afford. It was a pressure Layla felt deeply, even though Amina never blamed her. She longed to be a source of relief for her mother, but she was just a girl, powerless against the weight of their struggles. The sudden noise of screeching tires broke her from her thoughts. Around the bend, a sleek black car skidded to a stop, smoke pouring from the hood. Flames began to flicker, licking at the edges of the engine. Layla froze for a moment, her heart pounding. Then she saw him, a man in an expensive suit, struggling with the door. He coughed, panic overtaking his movements as the fire grew. Without thinking, Layla dropped her sack and ran toward the car. The heat was intense as she approached, the acrid smell of burning rubber filling her nose. "Help!" the man shouted, his voice hoarse from the smoke. Layla didn't hesitate. She grabbed a stick lying nearby and used it to pry at the door's handle. After several frantic attempts, the latch gave way, and the man tumbled out, coughing and gasping for air. She helped him to his feet, pulling him away from the flames. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. He nodded, though his eyes were wide with disbelief. The two of them stood together, watching as the fire consumed the front of the car. Layla found herself wishing for water, a bucket of sand, anything to help. But there was nothing, just the dry earth and the relentless sun. "Thank you," the man managed to say after catching his breath. "You saved me." Layla shrugged, wiping the sweat and soot from her face. "It's nothing," she replied. But it wasn't nothing. She had risked her life for a stranger, and in that moment, she didn't even know why. The man stared at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "What's your name?" he asked. "Layla," she said simply. "I'm Elias," he said, reaching out to shake her hand. She hesitated before taking it, his grip firm but gentle. "I owe you my life, Layla." She said nothing, only nodded. When he asked where she lived, she gestured toward the village in the distance. "Not far," she said. Elias offered to take her home once the fire had burned itself out and the remains of his car were no longer a threat. But Layla declined. "I can walk," she said. "It's not a problem." He watched her go, the sun casting long shadows as she disappeared over the ridge. Elias stood there for a while, thinking about the girl who had saved him. He knew he couldn't let this encounter end here. The next morning, Layla and Amina sat in their small clay house, sharing a piece of bread and a cup of water. The landlord had come by the day before, demanding rent they couldn't pay. His threats still hung heavy in the air. Amina tried to reassure her daughter, but Layla could see the worry in her mother's eyes. Their quiet morning was interrupted by the low rumble of an approaching engine. Layla stepped outside and froze. A shiny black SUV was pulling up in front of their home. The door opened, and Elias stepped out, now dressed in clean clothes and carrying an air of quiet confidence. Amina joined her daughter at the doorway, her posture wary. "Good morning," Elias said, his voice warm but formal. "I'm sorry to intrude. I wanted to speak with you both." Amina eyed him suspiciously, but nodded. "Come inside," she said. The three of them sat on the floor, the small room feeling even smaller with the presence of this stranger. Elias explained his reason for coming. "Layla saved me yesterday," he said, looking directly at Amina. "She showed courage and selflessness. I want to repay her, not just with words, but with action. I'd like to cover your rent for the next year and offer Layla a chance to attend school in the city." Amina stiffened, her arms crossing tightly over her chest. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," Elias said calmly. "I was once in a similar position. Someone helped me when I had nothing. I'm in a place now where I can give back. This is my way of doing that." Layla's heart raced. The idea of going to school in the city felt like a dream, one she hadn't dared to entertain, but her mother's skepticism weighed heavily on her. "We'll think about it," Amina said firmly, cutting the conversation short. That night, Layla and her mother sat in silence, the weight of Elias's offer pressing down on them. Amina worried about the strings that might be attached, about the possibility of losing her daughter to a world she didn't understand. Layla, on the other hand, saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped them for so long. The next day, Elias returned for their answer. Amina hesitated, her fears still fresh in her mind. But when the landlord arrived shortly after, his voice loud and demanding, something in her resolve cracked. She watched as Elias handed over the money to pay their rent, his actions speaking louder than any words. "If this is what Layla wants," Amina said quietly, "then I won't stand in her way." Layla's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, looking from her mother to Elias. "I'll make you both proud." Elias arranged for Layla to begin school the following week. She would stay in a dormitory but return home on weekends. The morning she left, Amina packed her few belongings with trembling hands, her pride and worry intertwined. As the SUV pulled away, Layla waved goodbye, her heart heavy with the weight of leaving, but light with the promise of a brighter future. In the city, Layla faced challenges she had never imagined. The school was larger and more structured than anything she had known. Her classmates, polished and confident, seemed worlds apart from her. But Layla was determined. She studied late into the night, asking questions, seeking help, and refusing to let the gap between her and the others discourage her. Slowly, she began to find her place. A classmate named Mira reached out, offering friendship and guidance. Together, they navigated the complexities of their studies, and Layla began to see that she could belong. Every weekend, Layla returned to the village. She brought stories of her new life and small gifts for the children, pencils, notebooks, and the occasional book. Her mother listened intently, her pride evident in the way she smiled and nodded at each story. Months turned into years, and Layla's confidence grew. She excelled in her studies, her determination carrying her further than anyone had expected. The village began to see her not as the barefoot girl who once sold trinkets, but as a symbol of what was possible. And Layla, carrying the lessons of both her past and her present, dreamed of a future where she could give back in ways that truly mattered.